This video is brought to you by True Tales of Buried Treasure, the largest collection of old treasure magazines in the West. On our website, you can search for individual treasure stories by region, or buy our original magazines themselves. To pay us a visit, please click on the link in the description. Enjoy. Canada's Northwest Territories is a massive, wild stretch of lush forests, brooding mountains, and raging rivers. This region includes the Yukon Territory and the districts of Franklin, Keewatin, and Mackenzie, making up a whopping 40% of Canada's landmass. That's about 1,500,000 square miles. The government hubs are in Whitehorse, Yukon, and Fort Smith, Northwest Territories. Despite the vast area, fewer than 50,000 people live there, which averages out to about 1.5 people per 50 square miles. Roads? Forget about it. Travel is mostly on the big rivers, well-worn trails, or by bush planes and helicopters. Hidden in this sleeping giant is a treasure trove of minerals. Over 90% of the region's output comes from minerals like iron, copper, silver, and of course gold. Gold fever sparked the Yukon Gold Rush of 1898. Many flocked to the Klondike River with dreams of striking it rich. For the McLeod brothers, Willie, Frank, and Charles, the Mackenzie District rivers were their obsession. This obsession led to Willie and Frank's untimely deaths and sent Charles on a lifelong quest for a lost gold mine. This mystery, linked to the events of the summer of 1905 on the South Nahanni River, in a place now called Headless Valley, remains unsolved. The McLeods lived near Fort Norman on the Mackenzie River, about 600 miles northeast of the Nahanni River. Charles, born in 1886, grew up with indigenous friends and became a skilled trapper and guide by 17. He learned the ropes of river travel and prospecting from his brothers. In 1904, the McLeod brothers discovered placer gold in the Flat River Territory and planned to return the next summer to find the source. However, they weren't prepared for the early winter. Disaster struck when their boat capsized in turbulent waters, and they barely made it to the Nahanni Butte trading post, losing all their supplies and gold. The following June, Willie and Frank geared up for another trip into the Nahanni. Charles couldn't join them, so they took a young Scotsman, Robert Weir, an engineer. Willie told Charles they'd be back by fall. By late October, with no word from the McLeod brothers or Weir, Charles got worried and called in the Northwest Mounted Police. A search team was quickly put together, but the brutal Nahanni River country, combined with extreme cold and heavy snow, made the search impossible. They had to give up the hunt. In the spring of 1906, Charles and the police restarted their search. With Charles's knowledge of where his brothers might be, they pushed on until they found a shelf of wooded land jutting into the water where the river made a sharp turn. Sharp eyes spotted what looked like a camp in a small clearing. As they came ashore, a hush fell over the group. What they saw was once a well-organized camp. Food supplies neatly stacked near a pile of firewood, a blackened campfire, and 2 blanket-wrapped bodies on either side of it. They looked like they were just sleeping. Charles approached quickly but stumbled back, signaling to the police. He was shaken to the core. The Mounties, used to the harsh ways of the North, weren't prepared for what they saw. Beneath the blankets were the bodies of Willie and Frank McLeod, but their heads were missing. Despite a thorough search, the heads couldn't be found. Charles insisted the decapitations were done cleanly and not by wild animals. A search of the camp turned up a few pieces of quartz heavily laced with gold. Charles took these and a large-bore Remington rifle found propped against a tree. One of the brothers had evidently tried to save himself. The headless corpse nearest the tree had an arm outstretched toward the firearm. Charles was sure of what had happened. His brothers had discovered a rich lode of gold and had been murdered for it. The gold-laced quartz proved they had struck it rich, but the amount seemed pitifully small for such a big find. Charles reasoned that his brothers wouldn't have left the mine for winter with so little gold. He believed the gold he found was just remnants overlooked during the robbery. A Mountie confirmed that the usual complement of picks and shovels prospectors carried were missing. Charles figured the tools were left behind in the mine, waiting for the owners to return in the spring. But what about the third partner, Robert Weir? The police couldn't find him. Speculation replaced sober reasoning. Charles thought Weir had killed Willie and Frank to keep the mine for himself. The Mounties, however, believed maybe Indians or wild beasts had killed the brothers and carried Weir off. The bodies were buried on the banks of the swift-flowing Nahanni River. Aside from the missing heads, there were no other signs of violence. Charles suspected the heads were removed to hide bullet wounds. Far from satisfied with the police's findings, he set out for Nahanni Butte, vowing to return, find the lost mine, and get revenge on the man who murdered his brothers. He fully believed Robert Weir was the killer, and later events might have proved him right. The tale of the murdered men was told and retold in newspapers of that era. Before long, the small point of land in the surrounding area was called Deadman Valley. According to all accounts, a person could walk into Nahanni and pick up chunks of gold as big as a man's fist if they didn't lose their head first. Soon, the whole valley through which the Nahanni flowed was referred to as Headless Valley. Many prospectors ventured into Headless Valley looking for the lost mine. Some continued to the Ross or Redstone rivers, leaving the area by different routes. When they didn't show up in the fall, people assumed the valley had claimed more victims. After what happened to the McLeod brothers, the local indigenous people avoided the valley, only passing through in large groups. The Yellowknife area Indians believed evil spirits could make men disappear, like smoke in the wind. A few adventurous folks went up the river just for the thrill and the sights, and most agreed it was worth it. Trips into Headless Valley usually started at Fort Nelson, BC. A 100-mile journey down the Fort Nelson River ended at Nelson Forks. From there, it was another 200 miles on the Liard River, all downstream and easygoing, until the South Nahanni River appeared. Then things got rough. Travelers had to navigate back eddies that threw their boats toward sheer canyon walls before swirling them toward a huge upthrust rock, known now as Lafferty's. If they got past the rock, they were in the rapids, paddling like crazy and hoping for the best. After getting through 3 sets of rough rapids, they reached quieter waters. The river was mostly shallow and extremely cold, flowing in a series of S-shaped curves, with plenty of sights to feast your eyes on. Just up from Nahanni Butte, the canyon wall split with a 1,000-foot waterfall. The split was about 4 feet across, with a fast-moving stream of water flowing down and disappearing from view, only to reappear a few feet to the right from a round hole worn through the rock. There was also the shortest river in the world, a fast-moving stream, 20 feet across and 75 feet long. It poured out from an underground spring and raced for the Nahanni just 75 feet away. Then there were the splits, formed by fallen trees and river sand, giving bewildered travelers a choice of 6 channels, 4 of which led nowhere. Many people got lost for days until they found the right channel. The actual Deadman Valley was reached only after a tough journey. Few knew where the murders had happened and often passed by. The hot springs were next, another 25 miles upriver. The hot springs gave rise to the legend of a lost tropical valley near the Nahanni River, where prehistoric beasts roamed among exotic vegetation. The spring's waters reached 98 degrees, and the steam made people believe they had found a tropical paradise. Most people stopped at the springs, as the Nahanni River would be just as dangerous on the return trip. Many missed the most spectacular sight of all, Virginia Falls. These falls, almost twice the height of Niagara, are divided by a gigantic pillar of rock, with an unbelievable amount of water roaring over the rim. Hidden away in a remote, mysterious region, no wonder people said the trip was worth it. In 1909, the Mounties were informed that a man's skeleton had been found in the Nahanni. The investigation convinced the authorities they had found the third partner of the ill-fated McLeod expedition, Robert Weir. The final conclusion was that all 3 had starved to death, and bears had taken their heads. Charles McLeod didn't believe Weir was dead. He spent years searching for the legendary mine to unravel the mystery. He insisted Weir had been seen many times in Vancouver, BC, and there were reports of him living in northern Alberta. There was a time when Robert Weir was supposedly seen in 3 places at once. In his quest to find his brother's lost mine, Charles McLeod enlisted the help of indigenous people who knew the area around the Nahanni River. He spoke 11 different indigenous dialects and was a trusted friend among the tribes in the Northwest Territories. From his own knowledge and the information he gathered, Charles believed the mine was located at Sheep Creek in the Flat River area. The Flat River runs through the high mountain country on the north side of the Nahanni, flowing between 2 mountain ranges and emptying into the Nahanni just 6 miles from where the headless bodies were found in 1905. Despite his efforts, the exact location of the rich lode always eluded him, Eventually, Charles moved to Alberta, started a small business, got married, and shifted his focus to his family's future. Years went by, and in 1926, a woman named Annie Laferte disappeared while traveling near the Flat River. She was rumored to be searching for the lost McLeod mine, and the valley claimed another victim. That same year, events took a strange turn for Charles McLeod. While in a fur store, he struck up a conversation with a man who claimed to know the Nahanni River and Deadman Valley. The man casually mentioned he had buried the McLeod brothers, which sent Charles into a frenzy. He chased the man, who escaped but left a tip leading Charles to a small farm outside Viking, Alberta. When Charles arrived at the farm, he found out the man had returned days earlier, locked himself in a barn and shot himself. The barn caught fire and burned down, leaving the man's identity a mystery. Was he really Robert Weir, or just someone who bragged too much and panicked? Charles never believed Weir was dead, convinced he had seen him in Vancouver and heard reports of him living in northern Alberta. In 1942, acting on new information, Charles returned to the district of Mackenzie. He formed an expedition and ventured back into Headless Valley. They found gold and copper, but not the fabulous vein his brothers had discovered. There were rumors that Charles had found the mine years ago and only went back to replenish his stockpile, but he always insisted he was still searching for the elusive gold-laced quartz. 3 years later, in 1945, the valley again made headlines as a cursed place. A miner named Ernest Savard was found with his head almost severed from his body, reviving old stories and superstitions. By 1950, Charles, almost 60 and worried someone else would find the mine, persuaded his sons to help him make one last attempt. Cecil, Frank, and Ivan McLeod joined him on the journey up the Nahanni River. In June 1950, they noticed more traffic along the river than expected. They met an American geologist who only talked about the weather while collecting rock samples, and 2 other Americans in a yellow rubber boat with 16mm movie equipment. The 2 nearly went over Virginia Falls, but were saved by the thunderous noise of the water. The McLeod's final expedition to find the lost mine was filled with encounters and close calls, but the elusive treasure remained hidden, leaving Charles's lifelong quest unresolved. The sons landed at the exact spot where their uncle's headless bodies had been discovered 45 years earlier. Charles found the graves by a mark he had carved on a tree, but the graves had vanished, washed away by the turbulent waters of the Nahanni. If there are evil spirits in Headless Valley, they didn't show themselves that day, perhaps because there were too many McLeods present. The group searched diligently. Charles seemed to sense this would be his last time in the Nahanni River country. They explored the entire Flat River up to the 6,000-foot level. Sheep or McLeod Creek entered the flat at this point, so the search branched off onto the creek. They found placer gold and signs of rich copper deposits, but the elusive mine of Willie and Frank McLeod remained hidden. Charles McLeod never returned to the Nahanni after his 1950 trip. He spent the rest of his life with friends and family, enjoying the rugged beauty of the territories. He always believed the lost mine would be found near McLeod Creek. Headless Valley has quite a reputation. Over 20 people have been found dead along the Nahanni River, with 4 proven murders and 2 possible ones. For such a remote area, that's quite a record. Then there are the disappearances. In 1960, 2 prospectors entered the valley and were never seen again. There's a lot of gold in Headless Valley. Somewhere near McLeod Creek lies the legendary McLeod mine. When it's finally found, there will be no mistaking its identity. The picks and shovels of the McLeod brothers will be there, waiting for owners who will never return. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to read the original article or purchase the magazine from which it was taken, please check out our website, truetalesofburiedtreasure.com.